This is the story of Optic Dashy, one of the most gifted and talented players we've ever seen in the CDL. With arguably the greatest shot in Call of Duty history, his journey to the top of the mountain has been an interesting one. Dashy started his career as a competitive sniper, which I think is fair to say has come quite handy these last few years, and it was around the Black Ops 3 time where he really started to get involved in the search and destroy community. At this point there were other talented youngsters such as Simp, Selim and Illy on the scene, which will later have come full circle as they battle it out at the very top of the CDL. But for now, Dashy was starting to make a name for himself, and an opportunity arrived when Illy tweeted out looking for teammates. After ignoring Dashy for some time, Illy finally played with him and realised how talented he really was. This was the breakout that he needed, as Illy had already have a bit of a following from the search and destroy scene. The timing was perfect because Dashy reached the age of 18, which was the legal age required to compete in the CWL. As his followers increased and his talent was showcased to more and more individuals, it was clear it was only a matter of time before he got the opportunity he truly deserved. The opportunity had finally arrived and it was time to compete at the biggest stage of the year, Call of Duty Champs at Infinite Warfare. After dominating the search and destroy scene, it was time to see if this talented kid really had what it takes to compete with the best in the world. The team was Dashy, Ricky, Studdy and Temp. Now, this wasn't exactly an all-star roster, but it was enough to give him the opportunity to prove himself to be one of the best rookies in the world. At this point, he comes up against a powerhouse FaZe where he meets FaZe Zuma, and we all know what happened in that first map. It's okay Zuma, we believe you, the lights were in your face. The series ended in the way we expected with FaZe taking the win, but we saw another glimpse of Dashy's talent. From his short time on the team with the qualifiers and the event, it was clear that Dashy is here to stay. The year was over and it was time for World War II. Dashy and Studdy were now teaming with Parasite and Fellow. This did not go to plan as they finished the first event as a 28th team. This would then lead to a full roster change and the remaining roster was now Dashy, Ricky, Sensor and Blast, dropping the whole roster but keeping Dashy in. The pressure was higher than ever, this rookie had to deliver. But things are always easier said than done. The rest of the season did not go their way and they ended up finishing 9th to 16th in many tournaments, with another top 16 placement at Champs, the biggest event of the year. Now, although the placings were terrible for the team, it was once again clear as day that this kid was very talented, and around the right people, we may just have a superstar on our hands. Match after match, Dashy would be showing his talent in every single game, and it was very clear that the gun skill that this kid required was one of the best ever seen. Now, while this team was in turmoil, on the other side of the CWL, we saw Optic Dynasty break down. After just winning Champs the previous year, things started to fall apart and Formal and Karma were released from the roster. As the off-season approached, it was announced that the CWL would now become 5 versus 5. This meant by every single roster would have to undergo some sort of roster mania, whether it was changing the dynamic of the team or adding a single player. Every single team would have to change things up. After yet another disappointing Call of Duty Champs that his future was in the air, although he was dominating all season long, it was unclear whether he would be ending up on a top team or not. But it was with the announcement of 5v5, it was very clear that Dashy would be joining the powerhouse Optic Gaming. Carmen was also returning to the roster, with TJ Halley forming a new roster of Scump, Crim, Karma, Dashy and TJ Halley. After many opportunities, this was by far the best one we've seen for Dashy in his career. Teaming up with the veterans Scumpy, Karma and Crim6, you couldn't really ask for much more. The team was perfectly blended with experience and young talent to hopefully bring Optic Gaming back to the top of the mountain after a disappointing year. Now, unlike the other years, this year started exactly how Dashy would have wanted, winning an MVP in his first tournament for the Green Wall and becoming a fan favourite straight away. Winning just the first event under Optic Gaming, the future looked very bright and they were set underway to dominate the rest of the year. But once again, things are always easier said than done. The rest of the year did not go to plan and there were many internal issues that started to surface, with Dashy work ethic being questioned. A lot of questions were all over the place and we weren't sure what was going to happen with the roster. Now, we can't put all the blame on Dashy here because there was also some internal role issues with the grapples, different specialists, Karma not knowing what role he wants to play, and overall the team structure didn't quite work out the way we thought it would. At this point, other teams such as 100 Thieves and E United had become much more consistent, and it was clear that this Optic team was not at the level of the competition. After the Black Ops 4 season, the Call of Duty game changed forever with the addition of the new Call of Duty League, the CDL. This now introduced franchise into the teams and caused complete changes in rosters all around the scene. Timing for the CDL could not have been any worse with the start of a global pandemic. Things went from bad to worse as Hex, the owner of Optic Gaming, was forced to sell his brand and therefore caused a lot of controversial issues. Dashy was still remaining under the team Optic Gaming, where Hex took his branding and his powers and moved over to the NRG team, where they required a new roster called Chicago Huntsmen. At this point, Optic Gaming still had Dashy under their contract, and where Hex and Chicago were building a new roster, things were not the way Dashy wanted them to be. The new team on the Chicago Huntsmen was Scump, Gunless, Envoy, Arcites, and the return of Optic Formal. Now it was very clear that he was not happy with the situation, and he wanted to play under Hex for the Chicago Huntsman roster, and he made it very, very clear to his new team at Optic that this was not his ideal situation. Now looking back at this kind of situation, I don't think that he really handled it the best way, and I definitely think there was better ways to handle it, but this didn't quite plan out the way that they wanted to. The roster was Kenny, Slasher, TJ, Chino, Dashy. There was many substitutes for Chino, JCap, Draza. The roster was just a bit of a mess, and players like Chino, Slasher and Kenny all talking about Dashy's lazy work ethic. It got to a point where the superstar was now benched. Fast forward to Champs, and Kenny lagged out due to the event being played online. As mentioned, it was a global pandemic, so this season was a bit of an anomaly, and Dashy by far had his weirdest year yet, not even playing for half the season. But this was the opportunity that Dashy needed once again to prove to the world that there is a real superstar out there. He subbed in for the Search and Destroy game after not playing a game regularly and took over the map with a sniper rifle, leading to one of the best tweets in CDO history. After an incredibly difficult year, Hex was back in charge and the CDO returned back to 4 versus 4. Things started to look back to normal, and Arcites decided to move to the powerhouse Atlanta phase, and Gunless was dropped from the roster. It was now time for Dashy to return to make the team a 4 versus 4 roster. For the first time, we saw Dashy and Formal on the ARs, and it was clear to see the mentorship that Formal was providing. What could have been an amazing season for the Green Wall once again was a shadow of what could have been. After many unfortunate situations, yep, that one still hurts. It was another year without a tournament win, and on the other side of things, there was an Atlanta phase winning everything with the addition of Arcites. The gap between teams was very obvious, and questions was asked: is Dashy's talent enough? Can he do the work to become the best in the world? Many were unconvinced. Once again, his work ethic had been questioned, and it was clear that being late for scrims was just a part of his nature. As the season ended, after what we thought was a fairly normal season compared to the Modern Warfare year when franchising was introduced, it was announced that Formal was retiring. In my opinion, the best ever AR player had retired, and although there was a lot of criticism of Dashy, it was evident that Formal had a lot of praise for the player and vice versa. Was Formal the mentor that Dashy needed to unlock his true potential? Going into the Vanguard year, we had the biggest merger in CDO history as two powerhouses were coming together. We had Optic Gaming and Envy fueling together to become Optic Texas. With FaZe dominating Cold War, the competition needed to react, and we got a new roster of Scump, Shotzi, Illy and Dashy. With a lot of hype around the merger and the Optic merger being the first of the year, the stars were aligned for a dream start. Optic versus FaZe for a spot in the winners final. The stage was set for an amazing match, and we got more than we anticipated when we saw this roster produce one of the most satisfying reverse sweeps of all time, heading Atlanta FaZe right to the loser bracket. Meeting again in the grand final, everything was set for the perfect story. Winning in front of the Green Wall at their first major of the year in front of the home crowd, we saw another battle, and after many years, Dashy and the team finally tasted victory once again. After almost 3 trophyless years, Dashy was back in MVP form, showing why form is temporary and class is permanent. With the form the Green Wall displayed at the first event, the sky was the limit, but like with all things, what goes up must come down, and we saw a series of unfortunate events. After Illy's injury, the rest of the season was one to forget. As the season took a close, questions was asked, and we saw something we didn't expect to see. After what looked like a promising season that was once again not fulfilled, it looked like it was time for a new challenge. Were the critics right? Was Dashy just another talent that would not fulfill his potential? It seemed like his time on the roster was finally over. Then within days, the news got reverted, and once again he was back with Optic Texas. Now this crack in the wall was just foreshadowing the future. With Modern Warfare 2 coming out, the team was back together after the release and re-signing of Illy and Dashy. The team was back with one goal in mind: fulfill the potential they saw so early on in the Vanguard year. Now we head into one of the craziest years with a lot of pressure on the first event. Things were worse than expected, with Optic finishing in one of the lowest places we've seen in years. It was clear that it was time for a change. It wasn't clear who was moving on, but the thing was for sure: the team we saw win the first major in the prior year was not the same team we were witnessing, and something had to be done. It was then when we got the news that Dashy had once again been dropped from the roster. It was clear that the issues were swept under the rug and had reappeared and resurfaced. But something changed that day. When Optic Texas released a video with Scump and Rambo discussing the roster changes, it felt like it lit the fuel in Dashy. From what they were saying, the issues such as discipline and work ethic had still been a part of Dashy's nature, the same issues that veteran Crimsix highlighted in the time teaming with Dashy. At this point, he had enough and went on his own mission to tell his side of the story, putting on the stream and letting viewers know his perspective. Dashy's issues with Rambo, the coach of Optic Texas, was discussed, and it was also clear that there was a major issue between the roster. Now, I think both sides did have valid points here. I think no matter how talented Dashy is, I think work ethic and discipline, including like becoming late for practice and all that stuff, they're all building blocks needed to build a legacy. And on the other side, a player that talented should be allowed the freedom to play how he feels and not be restricted in game. So I definitely think there was sides to both pieces there, but this was just a calm before the storm. Days went by and we finally saw a response, but not one that we expected. After 13 years of competitive Call of Duty, the king of the esports, Optic Scump, has announced his retirement. After personally delivering Dashy a message, the young pro had one more chance. After many years and opportunities, it finally felt like Dashy's time on the green wall was over. But now, with the news of Scump retiring, we were going to see the roster of Dashy, Hook, Shotzzy and Illy. This has to be it. A new beginning. Life after Scump. If the pressure wasn't there before, it sure was now. The team finished 4th at Major 2. Now, this wasn't what they wanted, but given the circumstances and the practice, they'll probably take it. And then they saw another roster change. To get to the level they wanted to be, they knew more things had to be done. And that's when we saw Illy drop to the bench and we saw rookie Ghosty make his debut. Now, many had never heard of him at this point, and it looked like the season had taken a turn for the worse. But to the surprise of many, Optic Texas had finally arrived. Going into back-to-back grand finals, the team looked like they were in fine form going towards the final part of the season. I really think that during the time of Optic's impressive run, that Dashy and Ghosty were the real superstars, taking on all of the objective work and still putting up very impressive numbers. This allowed Shotzzy and Hook to have the freedom to roam around the map and slay. The reason I mention this is to highlight the change in Dashy's playstyle. The kill-whoring agenda had finally been removed, and what we witnessed was a generational talent living up to his potential. Heading into Major 5, we can see the Green Wolf finally get past the hurdle. They were clearly the best team in the game, going 10-0 in qualifiers and back-to-back grand finals, but this was a chance to prove that they had what it takes to finally close out one of the tournaments. But it looked like the momentum had finally caught up with them and they finished in a disappointing 12th place after getting sent home by rivals LA Thieves. With very little time to prepare for COD Champs, it was do or die time for the roster. All the second place finishes would be for nothing if they did not secure the ring at the end of the season. The season ended in a disappointing 6th place finish for the Green Wall. Now, this season was definitely a roller coaster of emotions. Heading into the off season, it was once again time for a change. With Hook and Ghosty being dropped, the question was simple: who will be joining Shotzzy and Dashy in building this new dynasty?